journalist and foreign affairs commentator, Danny. Hi, Danny. How are you? Good evening.
Hi, Zohar. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm a bit concerned. First of all, because of the drone, and second of all, because I understand there is some unrest going on in Lebanon. So are we going to see not just a drone trying to flee out of Lebanon to other countries? We'll see people doing that as well?
Well, so that's a very interesting question. As you know, and as I'm sure a lot of the viewers know, Lebanon has had a very troubled past. And in a number of situations where there's been a civil war in Lebanon, many Lebanese have left the country, primarily to France and to Canada. Many Lebanese people, first of all, let's remember, Lebanon, a country of about under 7 million, a lot of those are Syrian refugees or Palestinian refugees as it is, and they can't really go anywhere.
And I understand that on the contrary, the people that left were mostly educated engineers, etc. So a very major and important part of the working force.
Right, and a lot of those people came back in the 1990s after the Lebanese civil war between 1975 and 1990 and the Syrian basically occupation of Lebanon at the time. A lot of Lebanese did come back. Those are the people, again, who had the more money, the more connections, the more power. But now we have a similar problem. Lebanon has started to fall to pieces. There are massive protests, and a lot of the problems stem from the fact that the Lebanese government, when these richer, more affluent Lebanese came back, they took their dollars and converted them to Lebanese pounds, and they tried to peg the Lebanese pound to the US dollar, but that was sort of laughed off the street. Nobody really believed that a Lebanese pound was worth anything close to what a US dollar was worth. Just recently, in the last few months, the Lebanese pound, which was not strong to begin with, has gone spiraling out of control, and we can talk a little bit about why that is. But now a lot of people are essentially left without money. They're left with what essentially amounts to monopoly money or fake game money, and they won't have an easy time leaving. Another thing is that even though some of these are French and Canadian citizens, now because of the coronavirus pandemic and the crisis, there are very few flights going in and out of Beirut. And now, so it's just physically more difficult to leave. So the Lebanese are pretty much stuck where they are, and they're in big trouble.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the economy, because we've heard reports about double-digit inflation rates in the last few months in Lebanon. So what causes that? What are the causes?
So there's as many people want to say, there's only one thing that causes inflation, and that's too much money. Lebanon has a very interesting problem in that they've produced very little, and about 10% of their GDP comes from remittances from foreigners, from Lebanese foreigners, and then another 10% comes from gifts from various foreign interests. And those various foreign interests are somewhat contradictory to each other. In other words, just to explain that Lebanon has a Sunni Muslim population, it has a Shia Muslim population, it has a Maronite Christian population, and all of those people get their funding, get remittances from somewhat different types of foreign aid. For instance, Hezbollah is, or was up until recently, almost entirely funded by Iran. And they didn't just use this for terrorist activities, but they used it for recruitment and buying off the population as well, which actually worked to the benefit of the Lebanese government, in that Hezbollah would set up hospitals and school networks, obviously to somewhat brainwash children into the more fundamentalist Shia beliefs. But it took some burden off of the government of Lebanon that Hezbollah was getting all this money from Iran. Iran, of course, is now also in dire straits, again seeing waves of protests there. Their money is, they're also very cash strapped. The other Arab countries countries, though, generally supported the Sunni-led government. Recently, though, just a couple of years ago, Lebanon had some major elections where Hezbollah was essentially the party with the most seats in parliament. And after that, and especially after Hezbollah's heavy involvement in the Syrian civil war, fighting coalitions that were supported by Turkey and Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, therefore, those Arab countries started to defund Lebanon, seeing that they were fighting Iran on one side and then giving to a country that was a heavy ally of Iran on the other side. So they started to cut back on these remittances to Lebanon as well. Lebanon is way over leveraged. They have probably one of the highest debt to GDP ratios in the world. I think they're probably at 140, 150% of GDP is in public debt. So they had to pay back a lot of money that they weren't getting from anywhere else. So they did what many foolish countries have done in the past, which is print money like it was free. And what we call in Israel the Etz HaKesef, the money tree. The money tree can only be harvested once. And this has had a horrible effect on their currency. And like I said, it's essentially left even very rich people, even in the more affluent neighborhoods of Beirut, people are essentially going from very upper middle class lifestyles comparable to any suburb in the United States or a suburb of Tel Aviv. They're all of a sudden poor. They have worthless money, and bread and milk and meat cost hundreds of thousands of Lebanese pounds, and even people who are doing very well up until recently cannot afford basic supplies.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I'm amazed because you were able to explain the whole complication of the Middle East in a nutshell and push it inside the Lebanon. It's amazing, and it's unfortunate, of course, but that is the situation. But I'm wondering if the economic crisis is the only reason for the current unrest, or are there other things that are players in this game?
Okay, so as always, there's politics. Lebanon is very interesting in the way that it has, compared to all the other Arab countries, a much more functioning democracy in terms of actual elections. But a completely dysfunctional government. There's a Lebanese joke that they say that every Arab country has a majlis, which is a parliament or a congress, but they don't matter. In every Arab country, it doesn't matter because there's only one person who makes the decision. In Lebanon, it doesn't matter because nobody makes a decision. So that's sort of the joke that's been running in Lebanon probably for 50 years. But they do have different political factions, unlike other Arab countries where there's sort of one, strongman leader, and there might be other groups. But in Lebanon, there's actual political factions in their parliament. They're basically divided up into two coalitions, which are, of course, very confusingly named the March 8th Alliance and the March 14th Alliance. These were in separate years, but they were two different revolutions. But they haven't been able to agree. They've turned really now to the patriarch of the Maronite Christians, Boutros al-Rai, who has, even among the Muslims, veneration and is well respected, has been trying to sort of bridge the gaps. It's very interesting. It would be sort of like if the Pope were to get involved between factions in the Italian Parliament. It's something that you wouldn't expect to happen, but he is using his station to sort of try to bridge gaps. But in the meantime, Lebanon is trying to apply to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, for loans. And of course, you have to do some paperwork. You have to do a proper accounting to apply for a loan from the IMF. And the different factions of the government are refusing to work on it together. And this faction is hiding numbers, and this one is hiding numbers, and they're sort of refusing. And therefore, the IMF isn't giving them the relief that, like I said, people on the street, certainly even the middle class people, but certainly even the poor people are doing so much worse, and they really see no, no help from the government in bringing any economic relief, and therefore people have taken to the streets en masse. They're setting fires, they're having demonstrations that have started off as very peaceful and have gotten increasingly more violent, just as people are very desperate. And
we have to keep in mind that a major part of the residents of Lebanon are not citizens, right? You mentioned that the Palestinian and the Syrian refugees are not citizens, even though the Palestinians are there for more than 7 decades.
Right. So, of course, Lebanon always had a policy of discriminating against Palestinian refugees, which was part of the general Arab policy of treating Palestinians as if they belong in Israel, in an attempt to basically create an international crisis against Israel's very existence, against Israel's existence, in fact. But the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon are now actually, they were always barred from certain professions, and they were never allowed to really develop into Lebanese society. But now there's very little they can do in any case. Just a couple of days ago, the largest hospital in Beirut laid off 850 people. 850 people. So it's basically but they're saying that the hospitals are even short on supplies because, like I said, Lebanon produces extremely little in-house. They import all of their modern goods from Europe, which is just virtually impossible when you look at the euro exchange rate with the pound. A pound goes for, a euro will go for thousands and thousands of 25, 30,000 pounds now.
Wow. And the one thing that is interesting for us as Israelis and for our viewers is, can we expect this situation to influence Israel as well?
So there's always a question about that. Of course, just like in Syria, when war was going on in Syria, there was a big debate in Israel about do we want the devil we know or the devil we don't? Israel's strategic goal is always to have stability with its neighbors. They prefer a stable neighbor, even like Assad, who's an ally of Iran and hated Israel, was somewhat more digestible than groups like Jabal al-Nusra or Daesh or ISIS, who knows what they might do. So obviously Israel is interested in Lebanon returning to some stability. The question is, would Hezbollah take an opportunity with their power sort of waning and lots of demonstrations? Would they try to sort of drum up support by returning to their old foe, returning to fighting against Israel, and then rallying people to say, look, our enemy is Israel and that's who's causing our problems? I don't know if people are buying it right now. The Hezbollah and the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Hassan Diab, who's sort of influenced by Hezbollah, even though he's not a member of Hezbollah, he did say something about how Israel's pressure to get Germany to recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, not just its military wing, but its political wing as well, has made it harder to deal with the IMF. This is true also because of the Trump administration in the US has also taken a very harsh line on any money that might end up in the hands of Hezbollah. They've been very cautious about trying to get it cut off, so without the US and Germany, that's again taking away another 2 sources of potential funding where they could possibly seek some financial relief.
Well, all right. That's about as much time as we have for the Lebanese issue today. Danny Herzl, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, and I won't let you go before I update